This is a lesson on the basic rhythms that you will see in music. If you have ever walked into a music classroom, you might have seen a chart that looks like this or looks like this. We're going to start with this one. You have your whole note at the top. You cut that in half to your half note. Cut your half note in half to your quarter note. Cut your quarter note in half to your eighth notes. Divide in half to 16th notes. And yes, if you really wanted to, you can go to 32nd notes, 64th, 128th, and so on. The problems with this chart is one, the rhythms are not lined up and therefore the countings aren't lined up, and that's shown a little bit better in this chart where we really want our ones to come at the same time, twos, threes, fours. If I tried clapping the 16th note line and somebody else is clapping the whole note line, the person clapping the whole note might be tempted to wait a little bit longer just because we're not lined up visually. So if we look at this chart now, everything's lined up. Our ones, twos, threes, and fours are now all lined up. So if I'm clapping my quarter note line and somebody else is clapping the eighth note line, we know that our countings are going to be lined up. We should clap one at the same time. We should clap two at the same time, three, four, and so on. We can take our 16th notes up here, and this time I've tried to do a job of showing you the different ways 16th notes can look. You can have them beam together. Beams are these thick black lines right here, and 16th notes have two beams. They can be grouped in four, beamed in groups of two, or 16th note by itself has two flags. And if you read a lot of old choir or choral music, you'll often see rhythms by themselves. Eighth notes have one beam and can be grouped in four, two, or other combinations, and an eighth note by itself has one flag attached to it. If we listen to our 16th notes, they are going to be consistent even though they look different. It's all going to sound like one machine gun in a way. So even though they look different, they all sound exactly the same. If we come down to our eighth note line, these are going to be twice as slow. Our quarter note's going to be twice as slow as our eighth notes, but now we have a good rhythmic idea that we should have this kind of mental and between our quarter notes, and that helps us stay together. One. Our half notes are half as slow as our quarter notes, but we have to think of this silent 2, silent 4 in here. We just can't clap 1, 2, 3. Well, I guess we can. I just did it. But we have to know there's a pause in there. And so on. And a whole note is going to take up the entire measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. On this side over here, we have our rest variations. Our whole rest sits underneath the line, and some people think it looks like a hole in the ground. And notice that this is the only symbol that will actually appear in the middle of a measure if things are written correctly. Our half notes sit on top of the line of music, and some people think that looks like a hat. Half note, hat note. Use your imagination there. We'll get 2 counts of silence. The quarter note, I think, or the quarter rest, I think is one of the coolest symbols in music, and each one of these gets 1 count of silence. We have our eighth rest. Our eighth rests have one little blip on them, just like the eighth note has one little flag on them. And the 16th rest has two little blips, same way as the 16th note has two flags. So the first thing that you need to do is understand what each of these rhythms look like. Can you look at an eighth note and say, this is an eighth note versus this is a quarter note versus this is a half note, hollow note head, solid note head, one flag or one beam versus 16th notes which have two beams on them. Can I look at the rests? Can I tell the difference between a half rest that sits on top of the line or a whole rest that sits underneath the line in the middle of my measure? Can I tell the difference between the 8th rest versus 16th rest and so on? And then the next step is can I clap these rhythms? Can I keep a consistent 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And since I started with my 16th notes, I had a much better understanding of how much time I needed to give my whole note. That's all today. I will see you in the next lesson.